For those who weren't here last night, very briefly, I was talking about how our fundamental motivation behind everything we do is looking for a better state of mind, a better state of consciousness, whether we call it peace, joy, happiness, love, ease, contentment. But behind everything we do, that's what we're looking for. And so much of what we do in the outside world, in the end, is about how do we feel inside. And pointing out that what happens with human beings somehow is we don't end up content. We have all this wonderful technology and science and comforts and things we've created, and our pets tend to be more content than we are. And why is that? And I was suggesting that our society, not just Western society, I think most human societies in one way or another get caught in a belief system that says whether or not you're happy depends upon what you have and what you do. So we become human havings and doings rather than human beings. And that's something that's just endemic in our culture. And it's almost like it's hypnotized into us from the moment we're born, that if we're not happy, do something, get something, find something, change the world in some way, or stop it changing in some way. That's what runs our culture. And I was saying how that's really what samsara is. The meaning of samsara is just that endless wandering on from one thing to another, looking for some satisfaction, but any satisfaction we get is usually temporary, and then we look for something else, and then something else. And that's the way a lot of the world goes, just following this, then this, then this, just looking for satisfaction, but not finding any lasting satisfaction. Because ultimately, what we're looking for is not out there, but it's inside us. And what our culture does is continually, in a way, create discontent in one way or another. We're told we can't be happy as we are, we need something, we need to get something. And this seems to be almost a basic error in our culture, this belief that it's outer well-being determines inner well-being. And I think what all the great spiritual traditions, in one way or another, have realized is that this isn't so. This isn't the way things are. Buddha, for example, I was talking briefly last night about dukkha. The first noble truth of Buddhism, dukkha, is that we are, the normal translation, suffering. I was saying a better translation is discontent. We all experience discontent. And the second noble truth of Buddhism was attachment, clinging. We cling to how we think things should be in order for us to be happy. So we cling to what we think we want, what we think we need, how other people should be. And that's the source of our discontent. And then the third noble truth is the ceasing, the letting go of that, the letting go of clinging. Realizing that what we're looking for is actually right here. It is us. It is our nature. It is the very nature of being is peace. It is love. It is joy. It is happiness. That is our true nature. And yet we're looking out there for it. There's that lovely story, some of you know, of Nasruddin, who's the wise fool in Sufi tales. He's a wise fool because he appears foolish, but there's a lot of wisdom in his foolishness. And there's one famous story, probably the most famous story of all of Nasruddin, which most of you probably have heard of, which is how one day he's outside his house, underneath his street lamp, scrabbling around on the ground, looking for something. And a neighbour comes along and says, "Oh, have you lost something? Can I help you?" He says, "Yes, I've lost the key to my house." And he says, "Oh, well, that's really important. Let me help you find it." And the neighbour gets down there, scrabbling around in the dirt, And after a while they haven't found the key, and the neighbour says, well, where exactly did you lose it? And he said, oh, somewhere inside my house. And he said, what are you doing looking for it out here? He says, well, there's more light out here. Now, we think that's funny, but in a way that's what we do in our culture. And what we're looking for is the key to happiness, the key to well-being, the key to peace. And we look for it out there because in a way there's more light in the world. We know how to manipulate the world. We know how to change things. We know how to make things. We know how to create things. The inner world of the mind is much, much more mysterious. We don't know so easily just how to allow the mind to relax, to come back to stillness. So the key we've lost is really an inner key to how to wake up to our true nature. You find the same thing in Christian tradition. There's that sign I sometimes see outside more fundamentalist churches that says, sinners repent because the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And the sort of the superficial understanding of that is, those of you who've sinned, who've done wrong, get down on your knees and be sorry because the day of judgment is coming. If you look at the original meaning of the words, it's fascinating. It's totally different. The word for sin in the Greek is amatano, which is a term from archery. And it means to miss the target, to miss the bullseye. It actually means slightly more, it actually means to miss the prize of hitting the bullseye. To miss the prize of hitting the bullseye in archery. And in life, what we're looking for, what the target we're looking for, as I say, is to come back to feeling at ease, feeling peace, joy, whatever it is, coming back to ourselves. That's the target we're looking for. And a sinner is somebody who's looking for that and has missed it, has missed the satisfaction of coming back to being, has missed the satisfaction of coming back to that peace and joy, which is our true nature. So a sinner is somebody who is looking out there for something and not finding it. And repent, the word repent in the Greek is metanoia, which means change your mind or go beyond the mind. Because what you're looking for, the kingdom of heaven, which is abiding in that quality, abiding in the peace, is not out there. It is within. It's right here within you. We're looking in the wrong direction. And our culture has us continually looking out there. And what all the spiritual traditions are doing in one way or another is say, no, turn around, look inside. That's where we find it. Although it's not so much finding something, it's more about letting go of all the veils that obscure our natural state. And yesterday I was talking about how it affects our society, how we go chasing after things. But perhaps the greatest cost of this wrong way of thinking is the spiritual cost on ourselves. Because we end up with our minds full of thinking thoughts, almost like a mental fog of thoughts most of the time, about what we need to do, what we need to fix, what we need to have happen, what we need to stop happening. That whole mindset becomes a continual thinking, really about how to get things right, how to solve problems. And we're great at problem solving, creative problem solving. If it's, wet, we design a better structure to keep ourselves dry. We're continually creating things to improve life. And if you look at your thoughts, most of the thoughts you notice coming up in meditation, if you look at them, most of them in one way or another are about how to fix things, how to make life better, how to find happiness in one way or another. Sometimes it's quite obscure, but it's really that creative process running wild when it doesn't need to be. And the creative process, it can be very loosely defined in 3 stages when we're solving a problem. The first stage is looking at what's up, assessing the situation. What's the problem? The second stage is decision making, choosing what to do, what are the options, what to do. And the third stage is implementation, carrying it out, planning something, putting it into action. And if you look at your thinking, you'll find an awful lot of it is about one of those 3 things. What's going on? What's up? Why are things happening like this? What do I need to do? What are the choices I need to make? How do I do it? Planning. I know I get into planning a lot. Some people get into worrying a lot. I get into planning a lot. How to make things happen. We all have our sort of chosen ways of getting caught in it. But the result is we end up in this sort of mental fog, which really veils this natural quality of being, the natural peace that's there. Is that the mental fog veils that, it covers it up. And that's why ultimately we're not finding the peace we're looking for, is we're so busy thinking about how to get it. The very act of thinking obscures that. So, as I pointed out last night, we cannot be at peace, almost by definition, if the whole time we're thinking about how to be at peace. We're worrying about how to get things right. We cannot be at peace in the present moment. We take ourselves out of the present. In fact, if you look at your thoughts, probably it's true to say every single thought you have is in some way about the past or the future. Thoughts take our attention out of the present moment. And that's why in meditation, a lot of practices are about coming back to the present, letting go of thinking, or leaving the thought behind, coming back to the actual experience in the present moment. And in the present moment, there are no problems. You may think there are, but if you look at it closely, there's nothing wrong in the present moment. I mean, just try to be upset at something, angry at something, or frustrated. Try to feel anger or frustration without thinking about the past or future. Try to feel sad without thinking about the past or the future. We can't. The present, in a way, is pristine. It's clean. It's unperturbed. It's our thinking outside of the present that creates the disturbance. What happens is, the way I see it, is we create an imagined reality for ourselves. And in that imagined reality, we see all number of problems, most of which never even exist or never even come into being, and yet we're busy worrying about them. I think it was Mark Twain who said, "My life has been full of disasters, most of which never happened." We just get caught up in worry, thinking, organising, hoping, expecting, whatever. And I call this imagined reality it's a secondary reality. This is my way of talking about it. Our primary reality is the present moment. And the primary reality right now is this room, the sounds, the smells, the sensations in my body. The actual experience is the primary reality. And then what happens is some little thought comes up. Just a little thought about something. Say, you think of somebody you need to call on the phone when you get home. A little thought comes up, and then you start thinking, oh yes, and I must remember I've got to talk to them about this. But supposing they, respond in this way, and you start imagining something, and that thought bubble, it tends to grow, and we start imagining a whole situation of what's going to happen when we get home. And our attention begins to get caught in that reality. And when it becomes really strong and important, we lose touch with this reality. That's what we call being lost in thought. So, someone is lost in thought. They're completely lost in this imagined reality. And that's again is why so many teachings talk about coming back to this experience now in this reality. But it's in that imagined reality that the sense of a separate self arises. I was saying yesterday, when we feel some discontent, the seamless whole of our experience, by seamless whole I just mean the totality of our experience, gets divided up into me here, the bit that needs looking after, and the world out there, the bit that needs to be managed or controlled in some way or another. And so we create this separation, me, world, me, the separate self, and the world out there that's separate from me. And this separate self is really it's almost like a character in a book. We get involved in this story of me, what I need, what I want, and we get identified with this story about ourselves. It's a bit like if you're reading a novel and you get identified with the hero in the novel and the hero's journey and what happens and the excitements and the trials and the tribulations and the disasters and the changes and all of that. We get totally identified with the character in the book and all the character is going through. And if it's a good book, we forget that we are the reader of the book. We forget that and we become identified with the character. It's the same when we get lost in this secondary reality. We get identified with this sense of this individual me that's struggling to get through the world, get things right, do this, whatever it is, plan a talk, all these things that the separate self gets engaged in. And we forget that I am the knower, I am that which is observing, knowing this experience. So we get caught up in this secondary reality. Our attention gets caught up in it. And this is what I call the ego mode of thinking. We often think of the ego as a thing, something called the ego, this separate self. If I look inside myself, I don't find something called an ego. What I find is egoic thinking. I find myself getting caught in my self-centered thinking, my own self-centered concerns, but it's a way of thinking that I get caught up in. So I don't feel there's a thing called the ego, but it's a way of thinking. And its purpose is to really keep us safe, to help us survive, to make sure things are okay. But it's just that most of the time it isn't actually needed. There's a lot of there's an attitude in sort of spiritual circles that the ego or this egoic mode of thinking is an enemy. It's something to be got rid of. We need to eliminate the ego, banish the ego, overcome the ego, transcend the ego. I see the ego mind is an ally. It's trying to help us. It's just that 99% of the time it's not actually needed. It's not really needed to be there. So what I like to do, and I suggest something you might explore in your own life, is when you find yourself caught up in that egoic thinking, Just recognize it and just say thank you. Thank you for caring. Because that's what it's doing. It's trying to keep you safe. Just say thank you for caring and let it go. And if you see the ego as a way of thinking, you realize it's something we can step out of. It's not something to be got rid of. We can step out of it any moment of the day. We can step out of that way of thinking. It'll come back. It'll come back. But we can step out of it again, and it comes back and we step out of it. And that to me is part of the spiritual practice, is just recognizing when we're getting caught up in that fair, controlling mode of thinking, and just seeing it for what it is and say, okay, no need for that now. I mean, a simple example I'm sure you can all relate to is getting caught in a traffic jam. The ego mind will start telling you all the things to fear that could go wrong about being in a traffic jam. You're going to be late home or late for the appointment, or you're going to miss something, or someone's going to be upset at you, or whatever it is. Or you can get upset at yourself. I shouldn't have come this way. I should have realized whatever it was. That's the ego mind getting engaged, telling you all these stories. You can just let that drop and say, a change of mind. This is actually the perfect situation I've been waiting for all day long. Sitting in a traffic jam is the most relaxed part of driving. Think about it. You've got no cars coming at you, no pedestrians to worry about. You haven't got to control your own car. You can actually sit back, close your eyes and meditate for a minute. It's what we've been looking for all day long, but we've missed it because the ego mind comes in. This is wrong, something bad's going to happen, and we get carried away by this egoic thinking. And that's the fog which we get lost in. And I was presenting a framework yesterday. I was talking about the 4 fundamentals of being. The first was the fundamental motivation, what we're looking for. The second was the fundamental belief, the error, how we get caught in looking out there, which is really how the ego mind arises. The third fundamental I like to think of as the fundamental awakening from the dream that we get lost in. And this is the mystical experience that can come in many, many different ways. It can come sometimes completely unbidden to people, out of the blue. It can come through your own practice, your own sadhana. It can come through just seeing a beautiful sunset, falling in love, sometimes just by listening to a teacher, reading a book. Near-death experiences can bring that experience, open us up to that experience. Many, many different ways. And that's when people glimpse or recognize the truth. In one way or another, recognizing the way we've been living is actually insane. It really is. And that's the waking up of realizing we've been on the wrong track, looking out there for what we really are. Because if the characteristics of that mystical experience, there's generally several things you find, nearly all mystics. There's that sense of, first of all, a deep peace, a deep sense of serenity, a deep sense of everything is okay. For some it comes as a feeling of everything is perfect, which means nothing needs to be changed. So there's that sense of deep ease, deep peace. Very common is a quality of love, whether it's feeling loved by the divine, by the cosmos, or equally feeling a deep love for everything, feeling a deep unconditional love. That quality of love. There's a sense of present. People talk about the eternal present. Everything drops away and they're just in the eternal present moment. And these are all the qualities I was talking about yesterday. These are the qualities of being. These are the qualities of the unperturbed mind, the mind in its true nature. What I see happening in the mystical experience in one way or another is all that clutter, the chatter that goes on in the mind, for one reason or another just drops away. It just drops away, and there's that contrast of suddenly, this is how it is when we let all that go. And there's usually also the sense of the ego mind drops out, that sense of being an individual self, looking after this, doing this, worrying about this. That sense of individual self just drops out. For some people, that's actually a scary experience. Because if all you know in life is your identity with this little individual self, with all its concerns and worries about life and excitements and all that, if that's all you know, then when that begins to dissolve, for some people that can be a really scary experience, because they think they're losing themselves. But all they're losing is just this artificial sense of a separate self that's been created. The true self is still there. And by the true self, I mean that sense of I. That sense of I am, which is always present. Even when you have the experience of the dissolution of the ego, I had this with someone I was talking to a couple of weeks ago who was really scared by the experience. And I pointed out that the I was still there, the I that is the knower, the awareness, was still there. That I was aware of the scary bit of losing the separate sense of self. But that I, the knower, is always present. It's ever present. It's omnipresent. There is never a moment of your awareness when you are not present. We may not notice it. We may be so caught up in what we're engaged in, what we're thinking, what we're experiencing. But that sense of I is always there, and it never changes. By which I mean how it feels now, this I that is knowing this experience right now, is that same sense of I that knew yesterday, that knew my childhood. That never changes. My character, my personality, my thoughts, my values, what I'm interested in, my memories, all of that changes over life. And we can be very different people in some ways, but that deep sense of me, that deep sense of I, which is the true self, the pure self, that never changes. It's always the same. And we all know that. We all know that sense of I-ness. It's so familiar, but so easily overlooked. And I would suggest that's a universal sense of I-ness, by which I mean what it feels like to be me, not me, Peter Russell, with all my stuff, my history, but that deep sense of what it feels like to be aware. And that's what we're talking about really. When we use the word I like this, we're talking about being aware. What it feels like for me to just be aware is, I believe, exactly how it feels for each and every one of us, for every single person. it must feel the same way, because there's nothing personal about it. It's just that feeling of being aware. So I think that is also, it's a universal sense of self. And it's that which knows every single experience we have. It is the knower, the knowing of all experience. And so you could say about this true self, which is what is revealed in the mystical experience, it's omnipresent, eternal, unchanging, omniscient, in the sense it is that which knows everything that we ever experience. And does that start reminding you of something when we talk about what is omniscient, ever-present, unchanging? We normally, in many traditions, start putting that is the divine, and it's something out there which we label eternal, unchanging, omniscient. But that is our true nature. And I was saying yesterday how being, I use the word being as the essence of all that is. And it is our own essence. And so when we have that experience and drop back into ourself, we are really dropping back into the essence of everything, which is why it's so easily and correctly identified as divinity. That is the opening to divinity in ourselves. In this culture, it's called Sat Chit Ananda. Sat means, you have different translations, the truth, what is unchanging, always present. Sat, it is the truth. The truth is, as I was saying yesterday, the truth is I am. The one thing we cannot deny, that being aware. Chit is that. Chit is awareness. I am that eternal, unchanging awareness. And its nature is ananda. When we drop into it, it is ananda, which my preferred translation is great contentment, or unconditional happiness, unconditional ease. And that experience, that taste, however it comes, then becomes the motivation for the spiritual path, which I see as the fourth fundamental is the path to awakening. And you could sum it up from just about all the traditions in the world, you could sum it up in 2 words. Let go. Or maybe 1 word, surrender. It's about letting go of the patterns, the thoughts we get caught in, surrendering to what is, surrendering to the moment. And there's many, many different practices. There's the practices you do here, there's practices in many other traditions. And all of them, in one way or another, are about stepping out of that thinking mind, letting go of the thinking mind. You know, the basic instruction here tonight, when we're just coming back to the practice of just being with a particular focus, whenever the thinking mind comes in, just coming back. As I was talking in the workshop today, not following the thought, to me, it's like the first basic instruction in any meditation is don't follow the thought. In ordinary everyday life, yes, we follow the thinking. In meditation, when a thought comes up, it's just like saying, thank you, not now. You just don't follow it. And if you don't follow the thought, it's like we're not fueling the fire of thinking. And by not following it, you'll find the mind gently settles down of its own accord. And as the mind settles down, then our true nature begins to reveal itself. I know the Yoga Sutras here are very important, and you all know the first line of the Yoga Sutras because it's on your t-shirts. Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which is, again, there's many ways of translating it. My translation, the way I like to think of it, is yoga is union, oneness. I like to think of that as the end of separation, the end of a separate sense of self, the coming back to our own wholeness, our own oneness. The chitta vritti is the whirling of mind stuff, the fog of thinking that we get lost in. Nirodha can be translated in various ways. It's interesting, Nirodha is also the third noble truth of Buddhism. It's the same word, it's that letting go of the clinging. It means ceasing. Sometimes that's seen as a deliberate ceasing, sometimes as allowing it to cease. It can also have the sense of freedom from the whirling of mind stuff. But whatever it is, it's that when the whirling of mind stuff ceases, and then the second line is the bit that I think is really significant, then the true nature, then there is abiding in the true nature of the seer or the knower. Then you abide in your own true nature, the true nature of the knower, the true nature of consciousness. And that, I say, it's the essence I see of just all the traditions in one way or another, is coming back to our own being, recognizing that it's always present. It's not even that isn't true. It's not it's always present. It is us, but it gets obscured. But it's not. And I think this is important, it's not another experience. I know when I first started getting involved in spirituality and started reading these spiritual texts and things, I got the idea that I was going to have these marvelous experiences, these new experiences, reach some exotic, exalted state. And it was going to be another experience. But what we're talking about, the knower, the I am, is that which experience is. And as such, it can't really be an object of experience. So this is where we can almost we can deceive ourselves in some ways, like, oh, I found it. If you think you found it, all you found is another experience, however subtle, however beautiful, however exotic, however exalted, it's just another experience. What we're really talking about here is the dropping away of all experience to noticing that quality of being which is there, and it's commonly felt as a sense of just stillness, complete stillness, spaciousness. It's the space, in a way, in which all experience arises. And it has this quality of deep familiarity. It's like, oh, of course I know this. I just wasn't noticing it. I wasn't noticing my true nature. And a very simple practice I just like to offer you as something to take into life. I call this micro meditation. There's big meditations where you go off and you do a 2-day meditation. They're the great big meditations. Then there's the normal meditation where you do 20, 30 minutes of meditation, the normal practice. Then there's what I call mini meditations, which you can do when you're, between emails, stopped at a traffic light. You've got a minute to spare. You can just sit back, connect back into your body, etc. And then there's micro meditations, which are very simple, which is basically just to stop, just to pause the thinking. Whatever you're thinking now, just pause. You can put it on hold. Just pause the thinking. It'll come back. Usually within 2 or 3 seconds it comes back. But you can just pause. You can deliberately choose to stop following the thought, to pause the thinking. And when you do, what people normally notice is there's a sense of greater ease, clarity of mind, sometimes a sense of peace, a sense of spaciousness. We're just dropping back that little bit closer to our true nature. And this is something you can do 100 times a day, even 1,000 times a day. In fact, there's some traditions where that is the practice of just as often as you can, just stopping for a moment, just pausing and just noticing how it is to be without thought for a moment or two. And in doing that, we begin to just taste our true nature, and gradually that taste becomes more and more familiar, more and more apparent, and it becomes easier and easier just to drop back into that at will. And that some traditions call the direct path of just going straight for the I. Another question that I find really valuable in this, when I'm caught up in thinking, worrying about something, some feeling, whatever. Very simple question, which is, am I not the one that is experiencing this right now? Now, it sounds a complex way of phrasing the question, but I find it really important. If you say, am I experiencing this? It's easy to say yes. Yes, of course I am. But the point of the question is actually to make us reflect upon the fact that I am that. I am that. We can chant I am that till the cows come home. But it's so easy to get caught up on a level of not actually letting it really sink in. And that's why I find the question, am I not that which is experiencing this? Is that rhetorical question just allows me to reflect back, and it's like, yes I am. I can just drop back into that sense of being, which is the essence of every one of us and of every being in the cosmos. That's where we connect with the unity, with the divinity. So thank you.